Hello and welcome. Welcome back, as it were, to Shree's Sunday New York Times read-along. We kind of took last week off, did a quick mini preview, but we're back this week. Our guest is Lee Clontz, Director of Teaching and Learning at Emory University. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan, the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism, and co-founder of Digimentors, a digital and virtual events consultancy. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer of Sri's Sunday New York Times read-along and occasional guest host. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, our website. We're also live on Lee's Facebook and Twitter accounts. So everyone watching on Lee's pages, thank you very much for joining us. It is always a thrill to be with you on a Sunday, but sometimes we do take a week off. I was on vacation last week. I went to Chincoteague, Virginia, if you can see from the shirt, trying to get the angle just right. Still a little bit on vacation time. It's always hard, as a close friend of mine said yesterday, re-entry is always challenging. But we missed you. Hopefully you caught the quick preview that we did last week. I did a pre-recorded bit to promote this week's show and look at the front page, look at some special sections in the paper last week. So let's take a look at who's joining us already. Our friend Jonathan Borstein from the East Village. And he's listening in on a new computer. Jonathan, I know you've had some tech challenges recently. I hope the new computer works out for you. Joining us from the West Coast, Doug Levy, our friend from the San Francisco Bay Area at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. Doug, you're not the only one up this early, but thank you for joining us. My mom is joining us from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, in the house I grew up in. Hi, Mom. Always good to see you and kind of talk to you. We at least talk once a week, right? Kind of. She points out that it's in India's Independence Day today, August 15th. So happy Independence Day to everyone. We have Linda Lawrence joining us from Long Island. A little cooler today. I know that the East Coast had an incredible heat wave. And while we were gone on vacation, the DC area had major storms. We had a major storm last night as well. Crazy weather. We'll be talking about climate change in today's show. Some interesting pieces, particularly in the Sunday Review. But I want to give a shout out to Martha Roth joining us from Media, Pennsylvania, where the weather is lovely. And Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, one of the hosts of She's on Call. A great show that airs at 11 a.m. During most of the year. This summer, they're doing two shows. The second show is going to be next weekend. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And thank you, Sojana. We're saying that we need the read-along more than ever. Yes, it has been a series of crazy events. We're going to cover some broad topics, but of course, I think the craziest event that Dr. Chandrasekhar might be referring to is the collapse of Afghanistan. I mean, just incredible how quickly that happened. I mean, that's just one of the many stories that we'll be talking about. And I want to do a quick hello to Patricia Freidenberg joining from New York. Thank you, Patricia. So with that, I want to bring in our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning.
Good morning, Neil. Great to be with all of you. It's a little past 5:30 here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm here on work. I am now feeling the way Doug Levy and Diana and others who join us from the West Coast every Sunday. Thank you all for joining us and being here. Today, we do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern. We're live, but you can watch us later on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. So tag a friend, anyone who enjoys talking about the news, talking about newspapers and accurate information. Please share with them. They can watch live or later. Laura's watching from Philadelphia, where today I finally feel as though the weather is not trying to extinguish me. And of course, being in Phoenix, I know about really hot weather here. You did mention the big news of the day and the week and maybe the year, apart from coronavirus, is the fall of Afghanistan back to the Taliban. And this stunning photograph I'm showing you on my phone, this is a helicopter at yet another US embassy. Sadly, we remember what happened in Vietnam. And look at this. The Taliban surround Kabul as the US evacuates staff from the only Afghan city still in the government's control. Multiple $1 trillion and countless deaths and so much pain and 20 years have just resulted in going back to where we were. Just so sad to see this. And the real pain is, of course, for the people of Afghanistan. And we just have to hope somehow things will be better, but I don't hold out that hope at the moment. We'd love to hear from you as we're looking at the news. We welcome your comments. We show them on the screen, and that's our way of making this as interactive as possible. And Chris Gorman's with us. Good morning, guys, watching from New York City. Chris, great to see you. And there's Phoenix waking up in the back. It's a little brighter now. And Lippy says, good morning from a vaccination site in Times Square. Thank you for all you've done. Dr. Lippy Roy was our very first guest on my weekly COVID show. It was then a daily show and now weekly. And she's been a guest multiple times on this show as well. And Laura says, one of my colleagues is an Afghan national. He says, all we can do at this point is pray as the country returns to dark times. And we've seen already the fact that the Taliban, in addition to what else they might do, have already banned music on the radio stations in the cities they've taken over. And that was an early sign in the 90s of all the cruelty yet to come. And they've gone back to that. Doug says, Afghanistan is such a tragedy, a humanitarian disaster. And Doug, you're so right. We are going to be giving you a chance to share not just the show, but also we want to hear from you. So please tag a friend right now and they can watch us later if they're not awake yet. And Linda is watching from Long Island. A State Department friend was in that last helicopter out of Saigon. Afghanistan is like deja vu. And Neil, we want to thank you for doing an amazing job with this show, which was just something fun I used to do on my phone on Facebook, and it's still fun, but you've taken it to a whole new level with our colleagues. So a big shout out to everyone. We've been doing this now for almost 6 years, and we want to thank folks like the folks on our team, starting with Neil, who's at Neil Parekh, but we want to thank Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas at Kabara. They really make the show so different from almost anything you see online, and we're very grateful. You'll see comments, you'll see links to the stories, the annotations that they do are what makes this show so special, along with all the great comments coming from all of you who are watching. Tell us how your Sunday is. Tell us where you are, and we'd love to hear from you. And a reminder that this is all a production of Digimentors, the company that I co-founded and which Neil's vice president of. And we do social and digital consulting, conferences, summits, webinars, talk shows like this for other clients. And we do training and workshops, and we'd love to work with you. Email me, Sri at digimentors.group, and Neil at digimentors.group. If for nothing else, write to us because you've never written to a .group address before, and we'd love to hear from you. And Neil, before we look at the paper and before we bring on Lee Clontz, I want to thank everyone who has helped make this show such a special part of my life for all of these years now, almost 6 years. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. And if you have a story from the week that you want us to talk about, do tell us in the comments, and maybe we'll get to it when we see the paper. Ron's checking in from Dubai. Hello, good morning. Ron was one of our first speakers, first guests of 2020, a year that, of course, went badly in so many ways. He's in Dubai, but watches wherever he is, and he's pushing for you guys from here. Thank you, Ron, and I'm looking forward to having you back in my apartment in New York City when you come to visit us again. And Miriam Berkeley's watching from Hell's Kitchen. Heat today is less extreme in New York City, heartbreaking events throughout the world. And we will be talking about those events as we go along here. So remember, every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. So Neil, are we going to do a quick look through the paper and then we'll bring on Lee? So you've set up your kitchen table for us because I obviously don't have a copy of the Sunday New York Times so early out here in Phoenix. And you're going to tell us what we're looking at, and then we'll bring Lee Clontz on to talk to us.
Absolutely, Sri. We'll do a quick tour of the paper and take a look at what we have. Of course, we have the front page section. We'll dig into that a little bit, but just a quick preview. The earthquake in Haiti is the display story there on the left-hand side. And the lead story, of course, is the free fall in Afghanistan, both the news analysis and a lead story about that. Below the fold, you'll see a reference to Day of Rage, which is a special section that we'll get to, definitely spend some time with. It was a video investigation by the New York Times, and the print team put together an 8-page special section based on the work that their colleagues did. There's a piece about Lindsey Graham and his courting of Trump after initially being a strong critic, and back-to-school anxieties felt as safety rules divide parents. And I'll share myself. Emily is starting 3rd grade next week in person. Fairfax County is fully masked. We're thankful for that. Not much distance, 3 feet social distancing. And we're a little worried. We're a little concerned. We're not sure how Delta variant is going to play out. The talk is that we're not looking at getting a vaccine until November or the end of the year. So we're a little worried about that. The Sunday business section, go big or melt. That's a big ice cream. It looks like a golden statue, golden trophy or something. Has there been a better time to eat ice cream or more cutthroat time to try to sell it? So that's the Sunday business lead. Arts and leisure, in the heart of a crowd again, diving back into live music that shows big and small with COVID-19 worries never far away. So some great photography in this this story, and that's the cover story. We have the Sunday Review, a very interesting artwork, a guide to finding faith. So it looks like a interesting shot of clouds and then a moon or a sun lit up in red. Very, very interesting. That's the Sunday Review. We'll also take a look at a climate change story in the Sunday Review. Sunday Styles. Modern Love is the cover story. Some personal news. 4 writers whose essays inspired episodes in the new season of the Modern Love TV series offer updates on their lives. Dan Jones, the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times, was our guest for Valentine's Day earlier this year. What an incredible episode that was. Book review. The cover is Life and Limb by John McMurtry. The book is Damnation Spring by Ash Davidson. So we'll take a look at the book review later. The New York Times Magazine, The Kids of Camp I Am. Campers from a pioneer retreat for gender nonconforming children look back on what it taught them and their journeys to becoming who they are. This is looking back, I think, 10 years after these kids were in camp. So that's interesting. I'm going to turn to this piece first, and if we have time, we'll go through it in earnest. But this looks like a magazine. It's usually the New York Times has the T magazine, I think, quarterly. But this is something different. This is Aussie or OZ magazine. It's an advertisement, the whole thing, and it has interviews with A-list celebrities. But this is a full-on ad, which is really interesting. In issue 1, being sold for $7.99, I guess, on newsstands at some point. And here's the special section that we're going to spend some time with on Day of Rage, how the attack on the Capitol unfolded moment by moment. And so we'll take a good look at that later in the show. But that's a quick preview of what to expect for the show today. Those are all the sections laid out. Sri, why don't we go ahead and bring on our guest, Lee Clontz. And again, as a reminder, Lee is the director of teaching and learning at Emory University. And he was also a student of Sri's at Columbia Journalism School. He was class of 98, if I'm not mistaken. So Sri, we're going to bring you in, Leon, and there you go.
Hey, good morning, Sri. Good morning, Neil. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, Lee. This is so much fun to have you here. I saw in the thread that Neil quoted me saying that you are one of my favorite students, and it's absolutely true, folks. Lee is one of the folks that I always remember in 20 plus years of teaching, now 25 years of teaching at Columbia, Stony Brook, and elsewhere. And I always say he's one of my top 5 students. And then somebody did the math, and I say that about maybe a little more than 5 people. So that's a little suspicious, but I never list all 5 at the same time.
That's okay. I'll take it. Thank you so much.
Well, tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what it's been like to be in the midst of the pandemic and how you and your family are doing.
Sure. Well, I'm from an undisclosed location down in my my Zoom tomb in Decatur, Georgia, which is just east of Atlanta. And so my kids are both in high school. I have 2 boys, 17 and 14. They have both started back full-time in person, fully masked at their schools. And for the most part, it's going okay. It's been about 2 weeks. They're generally very glad to be back in school. You know, a year of virtual school, year and change of virtual school was pretty challenging, both as a parent and as a student, mainly for the socialization aspects, but also just the technical. You know, local school districts aren't really, you know, technically able to provide the kind of support that I think a lot of students needed. So that's been kind of one experience. The other is, as you said in the intro, I am director of teaching and learning technologies at Emory, and one of the services that we provide, Emory, I hope everyone knows, but if you don't, it's a research university here in Atlanta. And one of the services that we provide is learning management, right? The learning management system. And that obviously became an incredibly vital tool. It was always used by a large number of our faculty, but it became used by practically everyone after March of 2020. And so we really had to spend the year coaching faculty, supporting them, implementing new tools, making sure that the tools were robust and appropriate. And now we're entering a new phase. Emory's going to be fully back to campus here in the next couple weeks. Fully vaccinated. Vaccinations are required for everyone on campus. And, you know, we're very hopeful that holds. We're very hopeful that that's going to be an experience that we can manage and that we can, you know, keep things in an in-person mode.
Thank you, Lee. What about the family?
So, I mean, everyone's doing, I would say, okay. You know, I think that coming back to school has been generally good. It is a little weird because we've had a couple of COVID cases already in the high school. As I said, they're both in high school now, but not many. And luckily, we've not been contact traced yet. And it seems like the school is doing a good job at communicating out when there are cases. And again, there have been a few. I saw in the Times this morning, there's a story about that includes Cobb County, and there have been many more cases and certainly other parts of Georgia. But I'm in DeKalb County. DeKalb County has been pretty, I would say, conservative all along in how it treats COVID. We were, again, virtual for most of last year. There was some limited in-person schooling as well. But for the most part, it's going okay. There's this feeling that it could all unravel at any moment. The nice thing about having kids in high school is that there's a much higher chance that they're of vaccination age, right? Because everyone's going to be over 12. And so there's a hope that everything will hold together. But there's also the sense that it could come unwound quickly. You know, Georgia, if you look at the Georgia map, right now the more rural counties generally are hotter with virus than the more the populated counties. So we're hoping that, we can kind of keep it at bay.
I see that Michelle Lampe, Dr.
Yes.
Michelle Lampe is with us. She is director of the Emory Center for the Study of Human Health and a
Yes.
physician scientist studying growth and development with expertise in mechanisms of growth. Welcome, and what a great way to support her colleague. And that says something about Emory, that folks are up early and are supporting each other.
It's a wonderful community, and there is definitely a sense of, I think, of esprit de corps about the whole thing. I mean, everyone is really is really trying to bind together and make this new year work, right? And I think there's a sense that we can do it if we're on top of things and if we are quickly responsive to any, I think some outbreak is probably inevitable, but if we can keep it localized and keep it managed, then hopefully we can keep things running and keep students engaged and in person.
Naomi was watching and says, recently traveled to Indiana and was heartened by so many mask wearers. Also heartened because my son Ben married his soulmate last Saturday. You buried the lead there a little bit there, Naomi. Congratulations. So great to hear that about your family. And I'm also glad to hear about the masking. And, Lee used the word conservative to say that people have been careful. But
Yes.
Of course, we know that conservative circles politically have caused so many problems in this country with regard to the vaccine and masking and everything else. Out here in Arizona, this is, Tea Party land and now QAnon land. And so you walk around and there aren't very many masks. And that's kind of conservative principles at work here. So odd to think about governors who are all for non-interference in private businesses telling private businesses about mask wearing and not allowing people to have vaccine mandates, mask mandates, or even local government, right? Like one of the things these DeSantis and others want, Governor DeSantis of Florida want, is no interference by the bigger government, but his bigger government is going after the smaller towns. It's just so odd and so hard to understand. Nikhil's watching and says 6 years. Congrats. Thank you so much, Nikhil. Great friend of the show and of mine. I do want to talk to Lee about a whole bunch of things, including, what it's like to watch the New York Times' evolution, because you're a great student of journalism, as you were of obviously of digital media. I also said in the thread that Neil put together, quoting me, about how much you know about digital, and that was partly because of your own instincts and interests. But in 1998, you graduated from Columbia Journalism School, where we were at that cusp of big changes in everyday life, in media, and so much more. We'll talk about that. I also want to hear about life in the South. I know that you remember this, that I would ask you a lot about life in the South back then, because we obviously had lots of people from the South come to Columbia, but you were one of the first people that really talked about going back to the South and being in media in the South and what that meant to you. So I want to hear what the New York Times and the mainstream media get right and wrong about the South. And I also want to talk to you about your interest in pop culture. I presume 20 years later, they're still strong. I remember standing in line with you to watch at least one of the prequels of Star Wars. I can't remember if it was all three or just one or two, but those are all fond memories that I have of Lee. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please tag a friend. Please hit share or retweet whatever platform you're on. They can watch live or later. We're going to read through the paper and Lee's going to comment. But I do want to hear a little bit from Lee about this focus that now people are putting on politics of the South and of Georgia, and would love to hear your thoughts as much as you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. I mean, Georgia, obviously was a really interesting case this year because, the presidential race, it wasn't the decisive state, but it was certainly a very tightly contended for state. The Brad Raffensperger phone call that leaked, and then of course the Senate. We had this dual runoffs for the Senate. It was, it's a lot of drama here, and living in, I mean, Georgia is a funny state in some ways, because it is predominantly, like, if you looked at it from a map, it's predominantly a red state. But like, Atlanta is an intensely blue area, as you can imagine. I think last I saw, I think DeKalb County, where I live, I think was like 87% Biden, like, or something. It was very, very high. So there is this kind of strange sense, when I walk around, people are masking. When you go to the grocery store, like, it is optional for the most part in most places. But most people are doing it because it's just kind of their inclination, I think. I have had family travel here in recent weeks, and the stories that they tell are quite striking. Like, there's like no masks anywhere up and basically until you hit the perimeter of Atlanta, where all of a sudden everyone is I would say behaving maturely, but there is definitely a much more rural aspect to Georgia, obviously, than just Atlanta. But Atlanta looms so large that it's made this very interesting tension. The state house, the legislature of Georgia, is quite politically conservative. Of course, Brian Kemp is our governor. He's been pretty, I would say, hands off about masks. He's not requiring it nor prohibiting like DeSantis has done. So it's really been left up to local governments to handle it however they like, and local school districts for schools. But yeah, it's been really, I did not expect Georgia to kind of tilt blue. Every election, there's always this push, like, where people thought that could happen. And this year it happened to happen. I do think that it will be interesting to hear if there is further fallout over the next year from the Raffensperger call and from all of the efforts to overturn the election and overturn Georgia specifically. But it's been pretty wild. I got a lot of messages during the Senate runoffs in particular from people who were like, it's all in your hands. I'm like, I'm one vote. That's all I got. So it's but it's been a really interesting time to be here. It's an extremely diverse state, and the area where I live is particularly more so. So.
Okay. Well, we want to keep hearing from folks as we're having this great conversation, and we're going to dive into the paper in just a minute. And Dr. Lampe says, thank you for sharing the information about our Center for the Study of Human Health at Emory. Speaking of tech, we have our own podcast, Health is Everything, that I invite everyone to learn about. So everyone, find it on your favorite podcasting platform. And we'd love to get more people paying attention to health, especially with Dr. Lampe. And we'll be in touch, Dr. Lampe, about having you on various shows that we run. We have some great comments coming in here, so I'm just going to put them up here. Sujana is saying, Dr. Chandrasekhar says, doctors are so effing frustrated. I think it interferes with optimal patient care. And Martha says, and don't forget the nurses, the aides, the respiratory therapists, et cetera. They're all frustrated. But we should also point out that in many hospitals, there are workers, not necessarily the frontline workers, who are hesitant about vaccines. And we've seen that all over the country. And so this is such an unusual moment and an unusual time. So let's talk a little bit about the New York Times and your relationship with that paper before you came to Columbia, during your Columbia year, after it, what you think of it, what are your thoughts about it covering the South? Let you riff on it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I was at Columbia, I worked at night as a producer for the usually op-ed and arts sections when it was still the New York Times on the web. And it was funny because they weren't in the Times building. We were in kind of these like dingy little offices in an adjacent building. And the purpose at the time was really
it was fully like it was on 6th Avenue.
Yeah, it was it was not close at all. You did not feel like you were in the middle of like the Times. You were like in a very nondescript office. But what was interesting was, back then we really did I always called it like a human software job, right? Because you really were taking the content from the New York Times paper content management system and putting it into the web content management system, and you were really the human intermediary for those two platforms. And so we basically aimed to publish at about midnight, right? And we would take the paper content and just kind of port it over, and that was really it. And what I think is so interesting now is how, I mean, every news organization has had to do it, but how the New York Times has had to really evolve into both a newspaper, but also a breaking news story. I couldn't help but notice, like, when I got my newspaper this morning, my actual Dead Tree print paper this morning, the lead story is about the free fall in Afghanistan, but I had a news alert on my phone about Kabul specifically, and so it's like the story, even in a few hours, had evolved, and the New York Times as an organization has had to evolve to cover that, because this isn't going to be enough, So, it's interesting to me how the breaking news piece has really become something that every organization has had to contend with. This was back in 98, so 100 years ago in internet time, we were really just trying to snapshot the paper once a day. And if there was a serious breaking news story, they might put something up during the day, but basically it was snapshotting the paper. So watching them evolve to be both the newspaper of record, but also a breaking news shop has been quite interesting. I get both the Sunday Times and the Sunday Atlanta Journal-Constitution because I want to support our local paper, and it is kind of interesting to compare the two and to see how they cover both our region and also cover the world, and they're two very different papers, and so there's often very little redundancy in them. There's literally nothing about Afghanistan at all on the cover of the AJC today, which is kind of interesting. So I think I'm a big believer in supporting local journalism. I had a former student. I taught journalism at Emory for about 12 years. A former student who just left the AJC. So one of the reasons that I was always it always seemed important to subscribe was to look for her byline. But she's now moved on to Detroit. So,
well, thank you for the shout out to local journalism. And I'm so fascinated to hear that you subscribe at least to the weekend papers and print papers, and you're still doing that, which is just so nice. And a reminder to everyone, support your local media any way you can. And one of the things that's been frustrating for some of us who want to support stories of investigative journalism that are done in places like, say, the Times Union in Albany, is that you may not want a full subscription to it, right? So wouldn't it be great if there were like a tip jar that works for newspapers? Like, so, you remember the old days where sometimes people would send pizza to newsrooms when they were in the middle of big breaking stories. Like, that would be something I think people would be interested in, but I don't think that mechanism exists for a one-time contribution the way you can for nonprofits. And I don't think that exists in newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to buy a copy of the paper, there's not a way to just buy something for the day because you want to generally, that you'd like to support. It's I'm always a little bit, when now it seems like the trend is to give you a limited number of articles per month or some kind of, partial paywall. And I'm not going to lie, that's worked for me. I subscribed to The Atlantic because they finally, guilted me into it with being nagged. And it's a wonderful magazine, right? I don't know that I would have paid for the print copy had it not been something I was kind of forced to do.
I should point out that Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist and the funder of the Newmark School of Journalism, has just retweeted our live video. So welcome to Craig and his friends and followers watching. Another name from the past who, of course, has had enormous impact on journalism and just society, how people interacted with technology. And he's supported so many incredible news organizations and nonprofit news ventures. So big shout out to Craig. And I'm sure, Lee, you have also, like me, purchased a lot of things off Craigslist in the 2 decades that have gone by.
Absolutely. It's such a piece of internet history, and continues to be.
And everyone, be like Craig. Please share this video on whatever platform you're on and let your friends watch live or later. This video will restart right at the beginning as soon as we're off the air. Before we get to the paper, your thoughts on the New York Times and the South.
It's interesting because I do feel like the South often gets kind of cartooned in the national press. There are big personalities in the South, big political personalities, and often they tend to really dominate the media. Right now it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Previously it was Brian Kemp. I struggle with kind of the way the South is portrayed because there really is an extremely robust diversity in the South. I think that, I grew up in South Carolina. I lived there for 18 years before moving up to New York. And, I was there when the Confederate flag was flying over the State House in the 90s. And I was editor of my college paper. And, we were doing editorials about that then. And there are these real extremes of behavior. It's very easy to forget living near Atlanta, spending a lot of time in Atlanta. Atlanta's a very cosmopolitan city. There's a lot of folks from all over the country, all over the world here. Even in my little suburb, we have a town just adjacent to us, which is there's a large refugee population. I run out there, and it's you don't feel like you're in the caricature of the South that sometimes you see reflected in the national press. There's like these kind of big personalities sometimes I think will outshine really how I love the South. I really love, both from a climate point of view and from I'm just kind of hot natured, I guess. I couldn't do the New York winters anymore. But I also think that there's just a lot more diversity and a lot more. It's just a lot more cosmopolitan than I think it's given credit for.
That's good to know. I remember one of the things that surprised my friend Andrew Lee, who you know so well. You're my fellow professor, your teacher, and a co-founder of Digimentors, was that you didn't want to stay in New York. Like a lot of people, who graduate from Columbia Journalism School want to stay and will take sometimes less interesting jobs just to be in New York. Of course, the other job everybody wanted was Paris correspondent for the New Yorker, which they weren't giving out. But you were clear from the beginning that you didn't necessarily want to live and make a life in New York City.
Yeah, I found it. I love the city. Every time I go back to New York for a visit, and my wife is from New Jersey, so we have been back any number of times in the years since. And it always, I do like have a little piece of my heart in New York. I had such great memories there. I struggled with the not the pace, but I think the sacrifices that you have to make to live in New York. I was living there as a grad student and as an employee for a short time, for a couple of years, and I was always pretty broke, right? And I got the sense that I was living in an apartment that, the heat was spotty and it was above an egg distributorship and always kind of stunk, and it's just all of the kind of the funkiness that that comes with living in New York, and I did love it, but it did wear me out. And as I was starting to get to a point where I'm like, I'm kind of imagining getting married in the next few years and then probably settling down. I really couldn't conceive of how I would architect a life that I would be able to sustain, especially as a journalist. Journalism is obviously it's a tough road to hoe, and you've got to be able to be really flexible and be willing to move and change jobs. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. And just from a personal point of view, I had family that I had grandmothers who were aging, and, I wanted to be close enough that I could hop in the car and get home when I needed to. And so, I will always have, great affection and love for my time in New York. I still have my little subway, my pocket subway guide, subway map. It's just I've got a lot of great memories, but it just I didn't know if I could carry it through for the rest of my my adult life. So I decided to come down to Atlanta and give this a try, and it's been great. It's been great. It's a really good mix of both all of the features of a city, but then the comfort of the suburbs.
Well, good to understand all that. And Michelle says, have made sure to share the broadcast here on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Great online insight on a Sunday morning. Always love when teachers and students in the case you and Lee stay connected. I mean, we loved Lee so much that after he graduated, we kept him on for another year to work with us and to help us figure out all the stuff that was going on in the world of technology. If you think of 1998, just to put that in context, this was when Google was still new as a company, before Wikipedia existed. Wikipedia wasn't born yet. So that gives you a sense of how long ago Lee was doing pioneering work in digital. But let's talk about print. Let's get to that print newspaper that Neil has taken over the kitchen table for. And let's just look, and you should jump in, Lee, with any of the stories that you have comments about. And we'd also love to hear your thoughts on the stories. But for those just joining us, we want to tell you that if you've missed the news, the Taliban have completely surrounded the city of Kabul, and the front page of CNN, and I'm sure the New York Times online as well, is this image of a helicopter above the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. And sorry, let me show that to you again. Echoes of Vietnam. And I will just say, in a moment of editorial here, is that obviously America getting out of Vietnam and the way Vietnam has gone over these last 40 years has been great for the people of Vietnam. Do we have that confidence that 30 years from now, 20 years from now, Afghanistan will be in a better place after this image compared to that other image? And the answer is probably no, but we have to hope for the best. So let's look at the paper. Lee and Neil are going to talk a little bit about the paper. And Neil, I'll have you show the front page so that he can respond and you folks can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Sri. So Lee, I know you have the paper with you there. And before we close the show, we definitely want to take a look at both the front of the New York Times and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at the end of our show. So looking at the front page, the front section here, as I mentioned earlier, the display story is about the earthquake in Haiti, which just happened late yesterday, I believe it was. The lead story on the right, the free fall in Afghanistan. We'll definitely talk about the Day of Rage. That's this special section that we'll get to in just a bit. But let's take a look at what's inside. The Times Insider piece, and that's actually my favorite piece, is about the Day of Rage special section, written by Katie Van Sickle. And then what they do with page 2 and 3 is kind of give you tidbits to get you interested in what's inside the paper. The headline in history: cruiser sunk, 1,196 casualties. This is from August 15th, 1945. The U.S. Navy provided details of the harrowing story of the USS Indianapolis, which is sunk by Japanese torpedoes on July 30th, after completing a secret mission to the Pacific island of Tinian to deliver cargo for the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Kind of interesting that in terms of a headline in history, they didn't choose a tryst with destiny, India's independence on August 15th. But I'd be curious of what else they have chosen over the last several years for that headline in history space. There's this page 3, which is interesting, where they talk about of interest, noteworthy facts from today's paper. A single-shot espresso was created at the turn of the 20th century when the Milanese inventor Luigi Bezzera patented a machine that forced or expressed hot steam through ground coffee beans. I know my wife will be very interested in reading about that. She's a coffee drinker in the family. I actually lived in Seattle for 15 years and escaped without drinking coffee. In the ice cream industry, slotting, the fees that must be paid to retailers to get placement on store shelves can run as high as $40,000 per flavor. The phone of the singer-songwriter Lorde has no internet browser, and she is locked out of her social media apps with others handling the passwords. That's interesting. That's in the arts and leisure section. Over the last century, the sea level at the Jersey Shore has risen twice as fast as the global average because the land there is also sinking. That's in the magazine. In the early and mid-1900s, U.S. federal land managers left carcasses tainted with mange near the den sites of foxes or released infected Judas animals to spread the tortuous mites to foxes, wolves, and coyotes. A recent poll found that 15% of Americans believe the core tenet of QAnon. Let's pause there for a second. 15% of Americans believe the core tenet of QAnon, that there is a cabal of liberal elites who worship Satan and traffic children for sex and blood. This is from The Dangers of QAnon, which is in the book review. And then the last piece here, the couple David Gracie and Nirmala Devi, who wed in July, met each other 3 years ago while playing the online game Words with Friends. Interesting. From Sunday Styles, I guess the Wows section. And wow, absolutely. Here's a piece about the Jeopardy decision in terms of the hosting. Lee, I'm going to ask you right up front. What do you think of the Jeopardy decision? A little pop culture question.
So of all the things in the paper, that was probably what my wife Melissa and I talked about this morning the most, because she is deeply outraged that I think on NPR Politics Friday they referred to him as kind of Dick Cheneying himself and effectively choosing himself for this coveted job. I don't watch Jeopardy frequently. I don't have like a real dog in the hunt. I think LeVar Burton was kind of the choice that most folks were hoping for, just because he's such a likable personality and people have great memories of reading Rainbow. That is probably the political hot button I'm scared the most of, is the Jeopardy question. It's probably what's going to get hate tweets if I say. I don't know. I mean, I hope that it wasn't some kind of a sham. The past couple months of kind of, I don't know what you call them exactly, auditions weren't just a total sham, and that Mike Richards wasn't going to be the person the whole time. But it's surprising. I really would have thought that they would pick someone who would have some goodwill built in with them instead of what I feel like is going to be starting from behind a little bit.
Yeah, I really want to point out that I've been following this pretty carefully, and I was really unhappy with this choice, in part because it felt like he wiggled his way into this, and a reporter from the Daily Beast found out that one of the ways in which he was able to get that airtime was that and one of the other guest hosts early on said, "Oh, I can't make this time slot. Can we adjust it to X?" And everybody else agreed, but instead Mike Richards lied to his team and lied to the audience and everybody and said, "Oh, the other person couldn't come at all." And so if that's the kind of nefarious things he's capable of doing, then that's really disappointing. So he's going to host the daily versions, and the actress I'm not even sure, I've seen her for so many years, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Mame Bialik, I think. Somebody
Bialik, yeah.
Bialik. She is going to host primetime specials and other episodes. She herself has a background as an anti-vaxxer. Some of you know her from the show Big Bang Theory. She has said she's not anti this vaccine, but what we have learned, Lee, is the reason we have anti-vaccine issues in this country is not just because of the current anti-vaxxers, but all the people who complained and lied to the American people for all these years. Jenny McCarthy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right? These are people who put us in the position we're in today. And that's all about information and disinformation, and using the tools that you know so well. That's really had such an impact. I think we've only made it to page 3 of the paper, Neil, and we've got 40 minutes with Lee, so we're going to look at some of the other stuff, and I'm going to step away right now. All right, Neil's going to show us the other sections. And by the way, Lee, if you hadn't noticed, the paper about a month ago stopped doing the coronavirus stories all in one place. They put them back in their different series sections because they had it called Tracking a Virus. And now you have to find the coronavirus stories in the paper back in the regular sections.
Oh, how interesting. I only get the Sunday paper, so I didn't pick up on that distinction. I only I read through the week online. So
sure.
And they made that change in the Sunday paper as well. They go right into international now with this story about Montenegro and your $1 billion road to nowhere evokes the road to nowhere in Alaska from about 20 years ago or so. Here's interesting, again, clueless spy returns. Will France still laugh? A little more pop culture coverage. This is, again, coverage of Afghanistan, the earthquake in Haiti on the right. And then here's a really gripping story. This is around coronavirus. And you'll see that tracking an outbreak street, they've gone down to just a small strip across the top, instead of something the size of national. This is about why children in Indonesia are dying at such a high rate from coronavirus, and poverty is the factor there that's making things worse. Parched towns in California grow desperate for water. And then here is an interesting 2-page ad. Consider Amazon Original Emmy nominees. So we're in Emmy season. Underground Railroad, The Boys, All In, with Stacey Abrams, Small Axe, Sylvie Love, Uncle Frank. I have not watched most of these, so I'll have to catch up a little bit. I know my wife has watched The Underground Railroad here at Tubman. Starliner recalled to factory, a new launch delay. That's Boeing's rocket ship. Rape victim accuses rapper and spouse of harassment. A woman who accused the rapper Nicki Minaj's husband, Kenneth Petty, of sexual assault during high school filed a lawsuit on Friday against the couple. That's the story there. In backlash to racial reckoning, conservative publishers see gold. Here's a story about American Marxism sold 400,000 copies its first week. The success of Fault Lines and Thomas Spence, president and publisher of, I think it's Regnery Press, just surprised the daylights out of me. Here's the hotline. Here's the story from the front page. Parents feel back to school anxiety over safety rules. I was mentioning my daughter earlier. She's 8, so not yet eligible for a vaccine, starting 3rd grade in the fall. Biden administration plans for vaccine boosters, perhaps by the fall, particularly for people who are immunosuppressed.
Neil, I just wanted to say about that story about the vaccine boosters. Here we are in America going to 3rd vaccines while billions of people around the world are still waiting. And there's already enough confusion trying to get people the 2 vaccines who should be getting them, all the anti-vaccine people we spoke about and the vaccine hesitant. And now trying to get these boosters in there is going to, I think, add more confusion. I'll obviously, if it's legal, if it's allowed and I feel like we need it, I would get it, but only if it's not taking away, at least in America, from people who need it, especially the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions.
Absolutely. Here's that piece. I know Ron Thomas was interested in this piece earlier. This is the piece on Lindsey Graham. They went with 2 pages inside, big photo as well.
I just want to talk about Lindsey Graham because he's from the state that Lee's from. Lee, I have watched this man for now, I think 20 plus years, because he was also involved back in the Clinton days as well, right? I can't remember if he was a House manager of the impeachment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so there he was moralizing in 1997, 98 with all of that was going on. And then was a vocal critic of Donald Trump during the race and in 2015, 2016, saying we would destroy the Republican Party if we elected him. He is terrible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now there is no greater suck up than Lindsey Graham. So explain to us in a nutshell what drives him and what your fellow South Carolinians think. Of course, he does represent a more conservative state. And so that's all understandable to some extent, but this is hard to understand for me, some aspects of him.
I can only give you my opinion, but the way I kind of interpret Lindsey Graham and his role in South Carolina politics is that, I mean, South Carolina as a state is not generally seen as having a big kind of national footprint, right? It's not a state that people really look at as having, a lot of leadership in really anything. I mean, it is in some ways a great place. Charleston's beautiful. People travel there, play golf, but it's not probably for most folks a state that you think about day to day all that much. And I do think, and I've seen this with Strom Thurmond when I lived there and with Lindsey Graham, I think South Carolina really does, as a population, like a politician that is able to elevate South Carolina's stature in the government. You're seeing that now with like Nancy Mace, who has kind of gone back and forth on the January 6th situation. Lindsey Graham, I mean, I read this article yesterday and I thought it was really interesting how it really tracks how he has kind of chameleoned himself into positions of influence, right? And he's really willing to speak out against Trump when he thinks that will benefit him. He's, willing to, as you said, I'll use your word, suck up to Trump when it does benefit him. And I think that part of that is trying to kind of ride the wave of, South Carolina is a pro-Trump state. Generally, it's a pretty solidly red state. But I think also there is a bias in that state to politicians who are able to build what I would say is kind of an outsized level of attention for themselves, because again, South Carolina as a state doesn't generally get a lot of positive attention in the national press.
And that, I think, if we look at demographically, partly because it doesn't have that big urban center that compares to, say, Atlanta. And also, I think we should mention that South Carolina elected Nikki Haley, Namrata Randhawa Haley, as governor of South Carolina, and she's another outsized personality. And for non-Americans, part of the reason you want a politician who has an outsized personality and outsized influence in Washington is then you can direct money back into the state. Mm-hmm. So it isn't just something about the ego, it's about money, as it is with everything in America. And you can get bridges built and infrastructure, things like that, if you have power, if you're a player in Washington.
Yeah, and Boeing is big in South Carolina now. Car companies are moving to South Carolina. I think a lot of that probably ties in with everything you just said. One of the things that I thought was interesting in this piece as well was it talked about Jamie Harrison, who a lot of people, especially folks outside of South Carolina, really loved, and money flooded into his campaign. When it actually came to votes, Graham won by 10 points, right? I mean, it wasn't even really close.
He had no chance, basically.
He had no chance. But I think a lot of people outside of the state were like, oh, this is winnable. And it's like, I don't think it's winnable. I mean, I love Jamie Harrison. I think he's great. But it's like, that's just not a campaign that, I think we all remember in the late weeks of the campaign, Graham was running out of money and was, really appearing very desperate to raise money. Who knows how much of that was real and how much of that was performance. But yeah, when it actually came to votes, I mean, Graham won handily. So,
all right, let's keep going.
Absolutely. So that's the piece on Lindsey Graham. And finishing out the front page section, this is a piece, again, I didn't see it on the front page. I'm going to flip back. Oh, right under the Day of Rage, it was Cuomo's departure tarnishes a political dynasty. I read that as well. And here's a continuation. Imposing his will from the start, Cuomo tarnishes legacy in the end. I have to say, I assumed he would resign eventually, be forced out of office, but it went very quickly in the last few days, last week when it actually happened. In Alaska, the salmon catch hints at the chaos of climate change. If I remember correctly, one river, the salmon numbers are very low. So here it is. Fishers in the world's largest wild salmon habitat pulled a record-breaking 65 million sockeye salmon from Alaska's Bristol Bay, beating the 2018 record by more than 3 million. But on the Yukon River, about 500 miles to the north, salmon were alarmingly absent. Climate change, folks. Climate change is real. And that's the end of that front page section. It continues with the obits. Leon Litwack, who changed how scholars portray Black history, dies at 91. He brought passion and a love of blues music to his work. Frank Torres, 93, judge who sought more Latinos in law on the bench. He was the son of one judge and the father of another. And then also Karen Hasty Williams, 76, who broke racial barriers and glass ceilings. It's an interesting trio of obits, all dealing with either Black history, diversity, Latino judges. Interesting trifecta there. Of course, we're a big fan of obits. We've had several staff writers from the obits desk join us on the show, current and former writers, Margalit Fox, Neil Genslinger, Amy Padnani with the Overlooked series. If you are interested, there is an app called Lindsey Graham, which you can get on iOS and Android to help you memorialize and honor loved ones who have passed away. Check that out. Lindsey Graham on iOS and Android. At 9:30, what I'd like to do is now go to the special section to make sure we spend some time with it. This is a special print section of the Day of Rage, a video investigation by the New York Times staff. And what's fascinating about this was online June 30th, 6 months after January 6th. And I want to do a quick shout out and even go on camera with this. Sorry about that, Lee. January 6th, it is incredible to watch Republicans deny what happened at the Capitol. My neighbor is a Capitol Hill police officer. He's a bike officer, and he was there that day. He had colleague, Brian Sicknick, who was one of the first police officer who passed away, was a colleague of his on bike patrol. Several others one other at least died afterward. Several have committed suicide. It is incredible what happened that day. It's incredible that Republicans are trying to deny it. And I'm thankful for the New York Times for putting together both the documentary, the video that they have online, and turning it into a special print section in this week's paper. So with that, I want to turn to that print section and really dig into it a little bit. So what they did with that is a full page picture. For over 4 hours on January 6th, the seat of the United States government came under assault. Here are the findings of a 6-month Times visual investigation. Day of Rage, how the attack on the Capitol unfolded moment by moment. And so this 40-minute video that they put together, they broke down and brought it to print. And I want to give credit to Evan Hill and Haley Willis, who wrote this piece. It was reported by a whole team: Dimitri Caven, Haley Willis, Evan Hill, Natalie Renaud, Drew Jordan, Cora Engelbrecht, Christian Tribert, Stella Cooper, Malachi Brown, and David Body. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names. Graphics by Gilbert Gates, Mika Grundahl, Drew Jordan, and Bill Marsh. Designed by Carrie Mistad, copy edited by Sean Ernst. There are the credits right there. And the video, of course, is online. Since January 6th, former President Donald Trump and top leaders in the Republican Party he still dominates have sought to rewrite history. Mob primed for attack incited by the president. So here's the timeline they give. Starting at 9 o'clock, started the Save America rally on the Ellipse. 10 o'clock, then what was happening, fold of the paper, 10:12, 10:45, 11:10, 12. 12:17, Mr. Trump says we're going to walk down to the Capitol. 12:47, the Proud Boys move to a police barricade guarding the entrance. 12:53, protest turns violent. And so they show some highlights there. They show a small map of Trump supporters and where the speech was, and then supporters walking, marching to the Capitol. And then some of the scenes right at the Capitol with Capitol Hill police and at this point, I don't know if DC Metro had made it there yet or not. And here are some pieces from social media that they added. To all the patriots descending on Washington, D.C. on Jan 6, come armed. Someone said, we want blood. Someone had a poll, who would you like to see dispatched first? Nancy Pelosi, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, Pence, the Vice President, or others. Bring plenty of rope. Just incredible. And then here is the centerfold, and that's a great map of how things happen. They continue with the timeline above, and they have a map of how these people stormed the Capitol in several different approaches. The mob overwhelms the roughly 24 Capitol police officers standing guard on the West Lawn and breaks through at multiple points. 24 officers. Just ridiculous. Some images, 12:58 p.m. for over an hour, Capitol Metro police officers battle rioters on the west side. A wave of rioters at 1:03 p.m. forces the police to retreat. 2:13, a Proud Boy member, Dominic Pizzola of Rochester, New York, uses a stolen police shield to create the first breach into the Capitol. And 2:26, powered by the crowd, the police lose the line on the west side. And that was... I want to go back. I saw Diana's comment. Day of Rage is one of the many reasons media is such an important asset to the community. The truth must be shared. Absolutely. Could not agree more. Could not agree more. My mom weighing in, salute to the New York Times for giving the full details of 6 January. Absolutely. Patricia Freidenberg says, these are profound photographs and amazing diagrams. Graphics, shout out to the graphics department and to Carrie Mifsud for doing the layout in this print section. Laura Silverman, the testimony of Capitol Hill police officers was devastating. And Dr. Chandrasekhar, it's surreal that this happened in America and half the country closes their eyes while pretending to support law enforcement. And it's still continuing. There was a rally in Los Angeles yesterday, and someone shouting "Back the Blue" to Proud Boys who were part of this attack on law enforcement. And LAPD, there was someone from the LAPD that was posting supportive messages on social media. There are a lot of issues there. Again, swarming the building as officials hide. They continue the timeline from 2:13 all the way to 2:44. And then a detailed look at what was happening inside the Capitol on two levels. And another graphic of where rioters entered the building and the different breaches that took place. I would say for someone, I mean, the video itself is 40 minutes, and you definitely should watch that. But, you know, this is a good example of how people absorb information differently based on the medium. I think that with print, you really can dive into the details and review and look back and take a look at timestamps, etc. I mean, there's something visceral about video, but there's the power of print. And then the back page, order returns after chaos. They continue the look after 2:47 until 8 p.m. Over here, when the Capitol Police declare the Capitol and surrounding areas secure. Quote, I was invited here by the president. National man arrested for Capitol riot here. Justice Department pursuing charges against Capitol rioters. Some of these are iconic images that have come out now. And then voices from the aftermath and some of the quotes. So with that as a backdrop, and Lee, I want to bring you back into the conversation. What are your thoughts? And what are your thoughts about the coverage and the video, et cetera? What do you think?
So a couple thoughts. I mean, I watched the video in its entirety last night, so I'm really fresh with this because I knew this section was coming out today. And it's striking to me how complementary they are. I don't feel like either one is really 100% complete without the other. One thing that caught my eye just while you were flipping through on the center section is about the pipe bombs found at the RNC headquarters and at the DNC. I don't remember that getting mentioned, and that's just such a crazy, horrifying detail. And perhaps it was, but I don't remember hearing that. But just the ability to sit down and absorb all this information, whereas honestly, watching the video, use the word visceral, and that's the best word I could come up with. I mean, it's so just unreal, and it's a lot of it was video that I had not seen before, and having it sequentially structured so it was almost like a movie cutting between different clips, with multiple cameras all synced up. It's the two really work in a very kind of dovetailed way to tell this story in such a comprehensive way. It's not to get meta about this, but perhaps that's part of the point of the show. I did dig up Sri's syllabus from 1998 for our new media class. And one of the things that caught my eye reading this, I'm a pack rat, I keep everything. But when I looked at the things that we did in that class 23 years ago, image editing, audio editing, video editing, product management, interactive design, lifestyle management, and testing. And I'm like, man, 20 plus years later, those are the skills that it took to build something like this, right? I mean, aside from all the reporting, I just, whenever I look at something like this, there's the reporting aspect, but there's also the technical aspect and how this was all put together. And like the 3D renderings of the Capitol and the graphics showing how people approached, and how all that mixed together with the on the ground footage that came both from news outlets as well as body cams, as well as individuals who were there and were, foolish enough to share their video. It's an incredible piece of video. It's like,
of that 40-minute video just as you're talking.
Yeah, and it's absolutely worth a watch, because once you start watching it, you won't stop. I mean, it's really well edited and well assembled, and you can tell, the DNA from that video is also in the special section, but the presentation is different enough that I think both are absolutely worthwhile. I haven't seen if they're doing a web version of this special section or if the video is that web version, but I would really be curious to see if they take a third cut at it in some way that is that's on the website. I couldn't find it last night aside from the video itself.
I have to see this video. Yeah, I need to see it because it's so compelling. Even just these little bits that we're seeing here, how organized it was, how driven people were to, take back the vote and stop the steal and all of that day. And of course, Lee, I would love a digitized copy of that syllabus when you get a chance.
Yeah,
a big shout out to your class. They were filled with fabulous journalists in that class. And also to Andrew Lee, my digital mentor, who has taught me everything I know. And I learned from you folks. We all were learning together. Like, we didn't know what we were doing in 98 trying to do digital journalism, and we called it new media because it was new. And now everyone laughs at that name, but that was the only name we could have thought of at that moment. We have about 15 minutes left, and we've got a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to step out so that Neil can drive again.
Thank you, Sri. We will go through a few more pieces real quick. I think that an important piece to look at is the New York Times Magazine. cover story, The Kids of Camp I Am. First of all, just an incredible picture on the cover. Campers from a pioneering retreat for gender non-conforming children look back on what it taught them and their journeys to becoming who they are. So I just want to share a little bit from what's inside. And we'll get there in just a second. I actually did take a look at it earlier and did not bookmark the page. I didn't want to ruin the magazine. The Kids of Camp I Am. Campers from a pioneering retreat look back on what it taught them and their journeys to becoming who they are. Photographs by Lindsey Morris. Interviews by Ruth Padower. So even just looking at the pictures, Hannah, my story is so atypical for trans people. I've had such a small amount of real hardship. The incredible support I got gave me the confidence to explain myself to the world. This is Lindsey Morris's son, Milo, in 2003 at age 3. And then the opening page is Ryan in 2021. Give the opening pages over here. Elias, we'd all show what we brought to wear and worked out how we should do our hair and how to put on makeup. It was a few concentrated days doing things that I wished I could do all year. Nicole,
the web treatment. Sorry, Neil. Excuse me.
Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say the web treatment of this piece is equally striking. As I think everyone knows, the Times Magazine is often pretty customized on the website, the way the stories, especially the lead feature, is presented. And they did a really nice job with this and displaying the photographs in a very different way, but a very effective way for the web.
Absolutely, it's one of the things that we focus obviously on the print newspaper. It's a celebration of print and the New York Times in particular, but we often also show the online treatment because it can also be very powerful. Just reading some of these, Steffi, identify as male and use male pronouns and typically wear male clothes, but in my mind, I don't feel completely male and I don't feel completely female. I'm a mix and flow of all that. And these are 2 pictures. So Steffi. And then because of how other kids reacted to my gender, I was conditioned to anticipate animosity. That all fell away when I was at camp. And Tavish, originally I was a very feminine boy, and now compared to girly girls, I'd be viewed as a masculine girl. At camp, I could be myself instead of trying to fit into the mold. Just incredible stories, and just wanted to be able to honor their experience with this piece. The other thing that I want to focus on is some personal news from Sunday Styles. Are you a fan of Modern Love, Lee?
I am. I read the column, but I've not watched the show.
So this is the second season. Just dropped on Amazon Prime, and this has on page 4 through 7, and we'll turn to that real quickly. Their lives turned into TV episodes. So some background on what we're going to see on TV. What do you think of that one night we spent together? Maybe don't trust an online quiz with your personal life. And let's see if we have to go through the ad here. Interestingly, they didn't do it on 2, they did 3 pages. So they have the fold here. They really are as different as night and day. And then stepping forward into marriage, round 2. So where are they now? A great series of stories. I do want to do a shout out and give Wayne a thank you for giving me a heads up on the Day of Rage special section. Wayne Camdoy is a designer with the New York Times. The video investigations team does important work, and the video team is also one of the best partners with the Print Hub, with a goal to provide a unique, powerful experience on another platform. So thank you, Wayne, for watching and for sharing the work that we were doing. This is going back to the Day of Rage piece. And then another interesting piece to take a look at. This is not a magazine. This is not a special key magazine that the New York Times sometimes puts out. It's Aussie Magazine. It's an advertisement, as I mentioned at the top of the show. This looks like issue 1. So still trying to figure out what exactly that is. If you look at the inside, it says that Aussie is a diverse, global, and forward-looking media and entertainment company focused on the new and the next.
They have a big festival program that they do, Neil, in New York and Central Park, things like that. And the co-founders are Samir Rao and Carlos Watson, who you saw there. But it's the fact that they would take this as an ad and put it in the newspaper is fascinating. And I know I also wanted to quickly take a look at the weekend review, just the back of the weekend review when Neil's done with this, so we can tell folks about a great guest we have coming up on the weekly version of the shows that we do. The COVID show, we've done more than 280 episodes, and this week we will have another episode on Thursday talking about going back to school. But I do want to tell you about this incredible story, which everyone should read in the paper and online. This is Local Portraits of a Changing Climate, and how there's a piece by Davy Lockwood about Tuvalu and other places that are going to be uninhabitable because of climate change in her lifetime. And my father used to be India's ambassador to Tuvalu, based in Fiji, so he used to only visit. But it's a small place, and they're being overrun by the devastating effects of climate change. And she has a new book coming out this month, Devi does, and so we're going to have her as a guest in the weeks ahead. And this is also a great time to just thank all our guests on this show, including Lee, of course, but everybody who's been a guest on a Sunday to get up early. Lee, are you a Sunday morning person?
I've become a morning person in my advancing age. Unfortunately, I think that's just a thing that happens to you.
Yes, it has happened to me too. And I remember being in the lab with you at like 2 a.m. for various projects, including we covered the 98 elections, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember what it would have been. Why it was the New York City election.
That's right. Third rail.
The third rail of politics, as we called it. Jonathan Borstein is watching, and he says, "Great show." Thank you.
Sorry, Sri, before we move on, I just want to point out, not just Tuvalu, but Norway, Igloolik, Canada, China, and New Zealand are featured in this article. So it's not just the Asian Pacific Islands. And the book is called 1001 Voices on Climate Change. That's what's coming out from Davy Lockwood.
By the way, Liz Pressman says, "I'm a fan, keep going." So it's great to have all of you watching. And Sudha says, "Lee, thank you for giving us a historical perspective of the past." Lee, anything else that caught your eye in the paper that you want to talk about before we start to wrap up?
There was one piece in also in the review section on the third page about Apple and the new kind of privacy changes that are coming to iPhone, which I thought was interesting in the context of I'm a big fan of The Verge and the Vergecast, their podcast, and they did this really deep dive on. So basically, the long and short of it is, right now, if you upload photos to OneDrive or to Box or whatever, they're generally scanned for against a database of child pornography images, right? And they're flagged if it's something that is identified. What Apple's doing now is they're going to be doing that processing locally on your phone instead of in the cloud. And you can turn it off, but you have to turn off the iCloud syncing. So they're going to be doing both that, and they're going to be doing for minors if people are sending. There's some machine language technology that's going to be happening in iMessage. So if someone is sending a photo to another person, a minor is sending a photo or receiving a photo from another person, that the machine learning algorithm thinks is nudity, it will be they'll be given the opportunity to like, are you sure you want to see this? Are you sure you want to send this? And if they're under 13, their parents can be alerted as well. And I thought this was a nice kind of snapshot piece, but the Vergecast did about a half hour on it. And it was really interesting and really insightful. And so if you found this piece at all interesting, they go very deep on exactly what's happening and a lot of the details. And I thought that was really worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm worried about that, Lee, because I know you're one of my first friends who was a full, along with Andrew Lee, very much a Mac head, and they have said, privacy is a human right, a fundamental right. Tim Cook has made this a centerpiece. So this seems to me, even if it turns out to be innocuous, which it isn't, that it seems like a misstep in the way because they've always been at the forefront of this. So why they would do this, and sometimes ages can get confused in the systems. I know this from my own daughter, who is no longer a minor, but because of settings I had put in accidentally on purpose back when she was 12, it still treats her that way. The Apple phone does. And there are things locked out. I can't remember the password, all kinds of trouble I'm in with her. So and then judging what is nudity, what is underage, what's not, all of this, it has to be filed under what could go wrong. The answer is almost everything here. And so that's disappointing that they have done this. They're defending themselves very strongly, but I don't think they're in the right here.
Well, and that's one of the things they talked about on the Vergecast, was they were saying that like what Apple is doing, like there's a good story to tell there, but man, they just really came off the blocks tumbling with how they told it. Because really the big difference now is like your photos are going to be scanned even if you like don't upload them. They're being scanned locally. And there's this idea that maybe it's because they're going to do end-to-end encryption in iCloud, and so they wouldn't be able to scan them if they were posted. But there's all kinds of interesting kind of potential ramifications of this. China comes up. What if China wants to scan not pornographic photos, but wants to scan photos potentially of political dissidents or something? So it's a really interesting topic, and I thought the Times piece gets to part of it, but I really thought the Vergecast, the deep dive, was well worth the listen.
Someone had asked, so let's be clear. This called The Verge is a terrific tech news and opinion website, edited by Neil A. Patel, and it has a podcast like so many folks, and they do a really good deep dive conversation, as he's saying, into this topic. And this feels like a misstep to me because Apple didn't need to pick this fight. Like there's enough going on in the world that to make this the centerpiece of their, the second half of 2021 seems like a misstep. As we start to wrap up here, I do want to say that those of us who teach and study in universities depend on people like Lee who help us teach and learn. And that's why the work he does at Emory is so important. So I'm going to give him a chance to give a shout out to his team and his colleagues at Emory. Lee, I had made, when I was chief digital officer of Columbia University, I made the bold prediction that professors at universities like Columbia, Emory, all of these great universities, it'll be at least 2025 before half of them would be willing to be teaching online voluntarily. I was wrong by 5 years, because as you know, it was March 14th, 2020, when suddenly everybody had 2 weeks and they were scrambling, and it was completely a circus for both students and teachers. And we can laugh about it now, but there were professors who didn't know how to share attachments, let alone be in a Zoom setting. And I wonder if the virus had come in 5 years earlier, what state our society would be in terms of all that education.
Yeah, I do feel like last year would have.
Lee, before
Neil.
Before we do that, I want to give you a chance to think through that. We want to make a few announcements first and share a few surprises with our viewers who are still with us before coming back to you for your final thoughts and talking about your work at Emory University, Lee. So you get a chance
especially so you don't miss. Especially so you don't miss somebody, you may want to write down the names so you don't leave anybody off your team.
Absolutely. Dr. Lampel in particular, definitely want to thank her for the work that she did. Next week, our guest is going to be Tina Kelly. She's an author, poet, and former Metro reporter for the New York Times. She shared the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for public service journalism for the Metro staff's coverage of 9/11. So we're looking forward to having her join us next week. We certainly want to do a shout out to our friends at She's on Call. The next episode is going to be August 22nd next week. And it'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern time. You can find She's on Call on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We certainly wouldn't be able to do this show without our great team behind us. So our team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. And of course, speaking of Carla, we always want to give a shout out to the Local Connection. Local Connection is put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists, and best of all, it's free. So please subscribe, bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. With that, the last piece we want to bring on as we bring Lee back on. Lee, we did not get a chance to cover your review of Wired Magazine's predictions from several years ago. Here are some of the covers, the magazines that you had shared with us. So maybe if you get a chance, you can share some thoughts in the comments after the show. We certainly want to see what they were thinking back in the day. We also want to do a shout out. Sri, you mentioned the COVID show. We have another episode coming up on Thursday, right? Back to school.
Thursday, back to school, the 2021. Elizabeth Chu, Executive Director of the Columbia Center for Public Research and Leadership, and a lecturer at Columbia Law School, will be talking about the fundamental four pandemic learnings reveal the value of high quality instructional materials to educator, family, and student partnership. So this is really for the K through 12 world. So if you know anyone who has a kid, grandkid, nephew, niece in the school system or as a teacher, they should all join us. And I do want to say to our sponsors, thank you so much to MuckRack. We love your support, and anybody else would like to join them as a sponsor, check them out at muckrack.com. They do incredible work for both PR people and for journalists. And we also, I do want to tell Lee that my center of gravity in my life is going to shift a little bit to the south, just a little bit, because my daughter is now going to be in the other Carolina, in North Carolina, in Durham. And we just got back. I left Durham and have come here. Her twin brother is going to UC Davis. So I'll now be torn between going to those two places. I'm in Phoenix now, but 2 days ago, we moved her into her dorm at Duke. And you can see we set up her bed, and I'm saying goodbye to her in this photograph. It was a bittersweet moment, very, very proud of her and her brother. But it's one of those things I call a hashtag life highlight. And just glad to be able to share that with all of you here today. Many of you know my children from my social media posts, much to their anger, and I'm not allowed. So we reached a compromise, Lee, that I can post about them occasionally as long as I don't tag them, because they don't care if they're not tagged because it doesn't show up anywhere in their sense that funny. No one's looking, right? The tagging creates a notification that goes throughout their high school and all of that, their circles. But if they're not tagged, it's like, we used to call it, Lee, security by obscurity. Yep. And that was back in the day.
That is really great. Some things never change. How did we get so old? I don't know how it's possible. We have children who are graduating and graduating.
School, which is like Sri wasn't always that old, Lee. Maybe you can give us a little background on these pictures of Sri from back in the day.
Where did those come from?
Shocking.
Yes. I mined my photo. As I said, I don't throw anything away. So I went through my old Columbia photo archive looking for stuff and happened upon those special shots from a house party back in 1998. So
I think we're doing the Macarena. I'm not sure what's going on.
I'm pretty sure that's a Macarena, yes.
Yeah, this is, we used to, there's a party called Lucille's Ball, named after Joseph Pulitzer's daughter, that we have. It includes a faculty roast and some faculty dancing, and that's always embarrassing. But nothing.
Is that what that is, Sri?
Yeah, it's supposed to be dancing.
Wasn't quite sure.
It wasn't clear. It wasn't obvious it was dancing. So
Sri had moves in the late 90s.
Yeah, I think we're ready for it's
he
7
lost them
a.m.
by the early 2000s, I think.
This is 7 a.m. out here in Phoenix, Arizona. Look at that. It's going to be probably 100 degrees here today. But I do want to get Lee's final thoughts in here and thank him enormously for joining us. Look at these great comments. Evelyn saying, thanks, Sri and team. Everyone who's watched, we're so grateful to you. Thank you, and congratulations to both the twins, says Jonathan. Laura says, I love that photograph. Thank you. I will share it later and not tag her. And Ron says, been there, done that. So sweet, father-daughter. Thank you very much. And Miriam says, so much hair. Yes, I did. I had a lot of hair. And once upon a time, I used to worry about how to, worry about hair management, but no longer a concern. Also same for Lee. So with that, let's hand it over to Lee and some final thoughts.
I mean, I will just say that, the words flexibility and resilience have a lot of mileage on them in the past year and a half. Certainly, I know my team probably gets tired of hearing them, but the team, both that I manage at Emory and the teams that we coordinate with, faculty, staff, students, there are way too many people to name. But, you mentioned 5 years ago. I don't think that we would have been able to do what we did in the past year and a half, 5 years ago. So the technology really came right on time to let us keep doing the business of educating students and keep doing all the good work that universities do. And so I'm just really grateful to have had the experience of, as weird as it sounds, the experience of the last year and a half has really help to undergird all the work that happens behind the scenes to keep teaching and learning happening. And so I'm really very fortunate to work with the people I work with in the institution that I work for.
And
Thank
a great
you,
comment
Lee
from
Clontz.
Dr. Lampel again. It is an absolute pleasure to be here to support this community and our community of colleagues at Emory, now more than ever during these trying times with a pandemic.
Naomi says we're not old, we're maturing. Ron Thomas says, thanks for another show. And Ron is commenting about my dancing. I remember that great party at your house. It was a different party, not that one, but yeah. And Ellen's doing her part saying, congratulations to DNK, how wonderful, both great schools and away from home. And she says, initials don't tag. And that's right. So
Nice.
she's doing her part here. Lee, this has been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, please follow him on Twitter at Klontz. He was able to get his last name earlier than everybody else. It tells you how long he's been doing this. And where can we learn more about your center? Is it easily accessible on the public things that people can read, or blogging, things like that for the center?
So yeah, the homepage for our group is ats.emory.edu, MEMORY. ATS, Academic Technology Services, is the team that I'm a part of. So
great. And Sudha says, that's Neil's mom, says, I'm reminder when we took Neil to Wesleyan, it was very emotional. I can understand your feelings. Awesome. All right, let's say goodbye to everybody. Thank you, folks, and we'll see everyone soon.
my pleasure.
Great.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Sri.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next week.